All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Shvat. Bracha. Strimber in memory of her husband Avraham ben Kalman Eliezer HaLevi Zichron Bracha. Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating all the Shurban Drashos this month in the zechus for refuah sheleimah for Shulamis bas Susha. And our Daf Yomi sponsor today, Moshe Werdesheim, in commemoration of his mother's yahrzeit Liba bas Zusha Zichron Bracha. We hope in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families and nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Now, also with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Chaf Hey 25, and we are picking up on Chaf Daled Amud Beis 24b. We are picking up at Shala'achar Misa, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 lines up from the bottom. So I'll say just to reorient ourselves a little bit. If you remember again from the Mishnah, we had an interesting case. What was happening in the Mishnah? In the Mishnah, we saw this idea that, the Mishnah was talking about a situation where a woman, right, Rivka became a Nazira, and halacha l'maisa, her husband then annulled the neder naziros, but not until she had separated out animals. So we saw that again, depending on the nature of the separation, right, depending on whose animals they were, the Mishnah then introduced the case of money as well. That what often happens is, if there's an actual chatos animal separated, the chatos dies, the olah is offered up as an olah for a nedava, shlamim is offered up as a shlamim for nedava, but the Mishnah then made a very important statement, which was that halacha l'maisa, none of the loaves which normally accompany the offering of a Nazir are brought. So now, the Gemara picked up on that a little bit, and the Gemara was talking about other examples of cases where you could have a carbon that was brought by someone kind of in the parsha of Naziros, but because it was not a complete Naziros, therefore what? Therefore, halacha l'maisa, no loaves. So the Mishnah quoted, so the Brisa quoted 4 cases. We went through the first 2 of those 4 cases. Shelah, which was the case of the Mishnah. Shelo, which was the case of the father who makes his son a Nazir. And this is where we're picking up today. Shala'achar misa minalan. We'll say, what's the case of la'achar misa? Listen to this. Tisanya. Here's the case. We'll say, very interesting. If someone goes ahead and separated out money for his karbanos for Naziros. So we'll say, Reuben's a Nazir, and what did he do? He separated out money so that when my neder Naziros is over, I'm going to go ahead and use this money, this pile of money, to go ahead and bring my karbanos. What's the halacha? Lo nanin v'lo ma'lin bahen. Ultimately, again, you can't get hana, but if you do, these monies are not subject to me'ilah. Mipnei shehin ru'uyin lahavi bekulan shlamim. Ultimately, again, because halacha l'maisa, they are all fit to be used to purchase shlamim. Mace, v'hayu l'mastu. So what happens if Reuben, who was the Nazir, right? Reuben, who was the Nazir, dies, and he leaves behind a pile of money that was set aside for the karbanos for his neder naziros. But of course he died. He died before the end of his naziros. And I will say, in this case, it's mos tumen. What does mos tumen mean? Mos tumen means that the money was unidentified, meaning the pile of money was set aside for the karbanos of Nazir. What didn't happen? He never articulated, this amount is for the chatos, and this amount is for the olah, this amount is for the shlamim. Then what's the halacha? Yiplu linedava. Ultimately, again, then halacha l'maisa, all of the money is used for karbanos, but nidava, voluntary offerings. Let's remember again, I mentioned this before, this takes us back to our shkalam days a little bit. Ketzah mizbeach, right? Remember again, there's always like a dessert fund for the mizbeach, that the mizbeach should never be idle. So sometimes nidava could also mean that it goes, good, fine. Most mifarashim, what happens if Reuben dies? But halacha l'maisa, again, before he died, he had separated out money, and he identified, right, in that pile of money, this is for chatos, this is for olah, this is for shlamim. So the mechatos yolich liyam hamelach. So what says, we've seen this before. The chatos money, yam hamelach, Dead Sea, right? Lo nanin v'lo ma'lin, right? Ultimately, again, you can't get hana from it, but you also don't commit mi'ilah if you end up using them. The me olah money, yaviu olah, you bring an olah nedava, u'ma'lin bahen, and ultimately, again, that money is subject to mi'ilah. Dinei shlamim money, yaviu shlamim v'ne'echalin liyom echad. So we'll say ultimately demei shlamim. So if you set aside money for shlamim, once again use it for shlamim for nedava, and ultimately again all of these karbanos are eaten for one day. Ve'ein tu'unin lechem. I will say that last line is the only reason I'm bringing this down. So this is the case of shala'achar misa. This is the case of shala'achar misa. So we'll say essentially it's a very simple case. Ruvain was a Nazir. He set aside money during his neder naziros for his karbanos at the conclusion of his neder naziros. What happened? Bach Emes, he died before the conclusion of his neder naziros. What do you do with the pile of money? So it depends. If it was stumin, he never identified what amount for which karban, all goes for nedava. If he did identify chatas money, what do you do with it? Yamamelach, ola money, ola for nedava, shlamim money, shlamim nedava, but no loaves. So this is the case of us. So what we're identifying over here are karbanos that are connected to naziros, but do not have the loaves of a karban naziros. So this is case number 3, shela achar misa. What's case number 4? Shela achar kapara. What was the case of shela achar kapara? It's actually an interesting case. If you take a look, I will say, it says that Shlachar Kapara, I will say, is a case often of where, well actually, let's read it. Shlachar Kapara Svarahu. So I will say, let me tell you this, fine. So Shlachar Kapara means like this. Ruvain is a Nazir. He set aside, for example, either money or animals to be offered up as karbanos. Then what happened? The money was lost, or the animals were lost, and what did he do? He brought replacements. So I will say, then what ends up happening? Generally, what ends up happening after you think you lost something, you buy the new one. What ends up happening? You find the old one. Right? So again, he finds the old money. He finds the old karbanos. That's shala'achar kapara. So what happens over here? So I will say, it's going to be the same model. Let's say, for example, let's just keep it easy. If it was money, so again, he originally set aside money for a chatas, for an ola, for a shlamim. He couldn't find he misplaced the pile of money. Then what happens? He finds the pile of money, right? So he replaces it, gets a new pile of money, offers up his karbanos. Then after he offered up his karbanos, what happens? He finds the old pile. So what does he do? Chatas money, yamamelach. Shlamim money for shlamim nedava. Ola money, ola nedava. But, no what? Rabbi say, no what? No loaves. So that's the case. To which the Gemara said, where do we learn this out from? Shala'achar kapara svarahu. It's a svara. Shala'achar misa matam telo chazi lekapara. They both say, why is it that the loaves are not offered up in the shala'achar misa case, in the previous case? That's because ultimately, again, these karbanos do not affect kapara for the Nazir. And I will say, again, remember, the loaves are only brought with a sacrificial, with karbanos that affect kapara. In the case of shala'achar misa, why don't the karbanos affect kapara? Why not? He's dead, right? Because again, it's not really nidrei naziros. So Sotrabos, in the case of shala'achar kapara, where again he misplaced the money, found or designated new money, offered it up, and then found the old money, shala'achar kapara nami ha lo chazia lekapara. Ultimately, again, it's also not fit for kapara. Therefore, you'll offer up the karbanos, but halacha l'maisa, no loaves. So I will say, all the Gemara is trying to sensitize us to is that there are four cases where essentially the Nazir is going to end up bringing his karbanos, but the karbanos don't really represent the concluding karbanos of a natural or normal neder nazirus. And how is that reflected? That's reflected in the fact that you will not bring the loaves which normally accompany a concluding karbanos for a neder nazirus. That's all. To which the Gemara says v'sulaka. That's it. There's only four cases. So I will say. So again, remember the four cases. Shalo, right? I should really go Shala. That's the case of our Mishnah. Shalo. That's the case ultimately of the father made his son a Nazir. Shala'achar misa. Case of the Nazir who dies but left over money. And shala'achar kapara. The case of where he lost the money, replaced it with other money, then found the original money. Is that it? Those are the only four cases. V'sulaka, va'ika. Usha'ar kol shalmi nazir sheshachtan shelo kimitzvasan. So I will say, what about every other case of Shalmei Nazir. I will say any other case of a carbon being offered up for a Nazir that was slaughtered Shelo ki mitzvasan. I will say take a look at Rashi, left hand side, second line from the bottom. The mitzvasan lahavi ben shtei shanim l'shem Shalmei Nazir. I will say there's so many other cases. Let's say, for example, we're going to talk about this, the details of this. You're supposed to bring an animal that's 2 years old for the Shalom of the Nazir. Let's say you brought a 1-year-old animal, 3-year-old animal, or you shechted it with the wrong kavanas. So I'm going to say there are so many other cases that you could bring where the carbon is not ideal, and therefore even though the carbon is technically accepted, you would not bring the loaves because the carbon is not being offered in conformance with the details of the of the carbon nazirus. To which the Gemara says, "Sheshatan shlokim mitzvasan." So, for example, if you took a carbon and then you're supposed to take a 2-year-old animal instead, you took a 1-year-old animal. What's the halacha? And you shechted it. So ultimately, it's kosher, but it does not satisfy the Nazir's obligation. It's consumed for 1 day. And it does not require, again, the neck and the foreleg, which we'll discuss, nor does it require bread in accordance with what. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? There are other cases of, right, the Gemara made it sound like there's only 4 cases of a carbon associated with a Nazir for which you don't bring bread. But it's not true. There's so many other cases. Essentially, any case where you make a mistake in the animal that's being offered up, the animal will be kosher, but there's no bread. To which the Gemara says, no. Kimitzvasan kachashiv, shelo kimitzvasan lo kachashiv. The Gemara says, we're not talking about cases where you're offering up the carbon in an erroneous fashion. That's not what we're talking about. You're right, of course. Let's say if you want to talk about making a mistake in the carbon, oh yeah, there are plenty of cases like that. We're talking about a case where a person is following the halacha. Right? Where halacha l'maaseh, again, I'm doing what is obligated upon me, but despite that, there is no obligation ultimately to go ahead and bring the lechem. Beautiful. Well, say let's go back there. So remember again, the Brisa said that halacha l'maaseh, if he left behind money. I will say now this is the case that we were just quoting before. Namely, what happened? Ruvain was a Nazir. What happened? So what did Ruvain do? Ruvain went ahead and set aside a pile of money for his concluding karbanos. Then what occurred? Ruvain died. So what did the Brisa say? What did he do with the money? So again, chatas money. Oh, I'm sorry. Take that back. This is stumin. So I'll say, what does stumin mean? Right? He did not in any way identify which money is for what. Instead, all he has is a pile of money earmarked, karbanos for Nazirus. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? All of it goes to Nedava. All of it goes to the Beis HaMikdash to Nedava. And I will say, again, like I said before, it could either mean he purchases karbanos Nedava, or it goes to the Nedava fund in the Beis HaMikdash. Top of Chav Hey. But 1 second. How does everything go into the Torah? Remember again, one thing we've kept on learning is the unique status of a chatas shemesu ba'aleha. So I will say again, any time kind of you have unclaimed chatas is, or I should say, orphaned chatas is always dealt with differently, right? What do you do with chatas money? What do you do with it? Yamamelach. So how can you say that the entire amount of money goes to the nedava? What about the fact that there's chatas money mixed in there? How do you reckon that? It was very interesting. On Rabbi Yochanan, halacha hi ben Nazir. Shabbos said, Rabbi Yochanan says, it is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. What does the halacha l'Moshe Misinai say? That if you have a Nazir, he set aside money for karbanos, he did not specify which part of the pile of money should be used for what, and then he dies. The halacha l'Moshe Misinai says that what happens, we'll say? Yipul in the daba. That's it. And I will say, what's the great part about that answer? Can't argue it, right? You can't argue it. No, that's okay. It's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Except, Rish Lakish argues it. Rish Lakish Amar, l'chol nidrehem u l'chol nidvosam. So what's this? Rish Lakish says, now, I want to be clear. No one is arguing on the halacha, right? In other words, the halacha as espoused in the Brisa is the halacha that everyone is accepting. Ruvain was a Nazir. Ruvain, we'll say, by the way, you know what the muster of this case is? We'll say, what was Ruvain doing? Ruvain is trying to be a responsible adult. So what does Ruvain do? He plans ahead, right? How does he plan ahead? I'm going to go ahead and make my carbon fund, right? I'm going to set aside my pile of money for my karbanos. He's planning ahead, we'll say, and then something amazing happened, which was what? He died. So I will say, so it's such a fascinating musar. Do you have to plan ahead in life? Absolutely. But a person also has to plan ahead with a certain sense of humility, especially when it comes to personalistic accomplishment. In other words, do your estate planning. Absolutely. A person is chayiv to have a will. So incredibly important. A person, especially once a person has children, they have to have a will. A person has to have life insurance. Mamish. Having life insurance is the mitzvah of v'ahavta l're'acha kamocha. And it is important, push yourself to pay as high premiums as you can, so that chas v'shalom should something, I don't mean pay as high premiums, we're Jewish, I'm saying find low premiums, right? But lamaisa, find the highest amount that you are eligible for, because chas v'shalom rachman litzlan lo aleinu, if your family loses you, that tzara should not be compounded by financial distress. Mamish, as you see too many cases like this, of people who pass away young, unexpectedly, and the family is left with broken hearts and financially ruined as well. So future planning with your finances is an absolute obligation. Absolute obligation. But when it comes to accomplishment, I will say, sometimes when it comes to accomplishment, don't do future planning for accomplishment. Whatever you need to accomplish, the best thing to do is to try to what? Accomplish it now. Why? Because the truth is no one knows what the future holds. Reuven thinks he's doing a great thing over here. I'm setting up my carbon fund. Beautiful. Great. It's a great thing, except he died. So that, which I will say again, is a good thing. He set up the fund. But now, Lamaisa again, fine. So what Reish Lakish says like this. Reish Lakish says something amazing. Reish Lakish says, L'chol nidrehem, l'chol nidvosim. The Pasuk says, L'chol nidrehem, for all of their nidavos, and for all of their nidarim, and for all of their nidavos. What does this mean, says Rish? What do you do with this phrase? HaTorah Amra, the Torah teaches us, Moser Neder Yehei L'Nedava. Now I will say, this is such a fantastic drasha. Reish Lakish says, L'chol nidreim, how do you read that phrase? Anything that ultimately, again, is left over from a neder, by definition, should become a nedava. So I'll say, so what's happening, so I just want to be clear. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are not arguing on the halacha. Right? The halacha is that if the Nazir dies and he leaves behind unspecified funds, just a pile of money, that was earmarked for karbanos, what's the halacha? What happens to the money? What happens to the money? No. Nidava. What they're arguing about is, what is the source for this halacha? Rabbi Yochanan says, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Reish Lakish says, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a pasuk. It's a pasuk. L'chol nidrehem u'l'chol nidvosam. Anything that's a leftover from a neder ultimately becomes an adava. So it says, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan Damar halacha hi ben Nazir amatulaha hi stumin in mifurashin lo. So I will say, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that this halacha l'Moshe Sinai, I understand why this halacha only applies to stumin, not to mifurashin. Rabbi say, remember again, what's the distinction? Remember, Rabbi say, let's go back for a second. What happens if Reuven the Nazir are left by the pile of money, but he says, $100 for chatas, $100 for olah, for shlamim, $100 for olah. What's the halacha? $100 for mamelach, $100 for nedava olah, $100 for nedava shlam. So we'll say, so I don't understand. Why don't we say in that case also, when he dies, the whole pot should go to nedava? So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it makes sense. Why? Because it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We'll say, what did the halacha l'Moshe Sinai say? The halacha l'Moshe Sinai said that the pot goes to nedava in a case of stumin, unspecified, not in a case of mifurashin. That's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But according to Reish Lakish, l'chol nidrehem or l'chol nidvosam, my area stumin afilu mifurashin. Rabbi will say, but according to Reish Lakish, who dashes at the pasuk, I will say the way Reish Lakish dashes at the pasuk is what? Any leftover nedarim, where do they go? To nedava. If that's the case, why not apply that gzeres hakafsav? Why not apply that pasuk to the case of mifurashin as well? Even if Reuven left behind the pile of money, and even if in that pile of money he said X for chatos, X for olah, X for shlamim, when he dies, that's still a leftover neder. Why doesn't the whole pot go for nedava? It's such a good kasha. Amarava, listen to this. Amarava, no. Mifurashin lo matzis amrit. So no, you can't say there's no havamina to say that by mifurashin the pot should go to nedava. I'll tell you why. Because kvar paska tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Because again, Tana Rabbi Shmuel already paskin. And what did he paskin? Rak kadashecha sher yiu lecha o nidarecha. So I will say, so the pasuk is Rak kadoshecha sheyulachanu darecha tisa ubasa alamakom hashayif charashem. So I will say, ultimately again, your kadshim and your nidarim. It's actually talking about the obligation to bring these items to the Beis Hamikdash and sacrifice it there. So I will say, what does this teach us? What is Rak kadoshecha sheyulachanu darecha bevlade kadshim ubitmurasam hakasav medaber. So I will say, is very interesting. Rabbi Shmuel was saying, what is this pasuk referring to? It's interesting. The pasuk is actually referring to Vlade Kachim. So we'll say, what are Vlade Kachim? Vlade Kachim ultimately, again, are the offspring of sacrificial animals. Right? So offspring of sacrificial animals or Tamura. We'll say, what's a Tamura? Tamura is a forbidden exchange. The halacha is that if you have a karban and you decide you want to exchange that animal for another, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? You're not allowed to do it. Right? And if you try to do it, there's a penalty. V'hayahu usmura so kolish. Both the original animal as well as the tamura animal ultimately go ahead and become consecrated. So we'll say, by the way, if you just take a quick look at Rashi for just a moment, Rak kadoshecha, it's about 6 lines into the short lines of Rashi, the narrow lines. Rak kadoshecha shilacha mihein osan kachim shehin achshav vasidim lahamid achirim tachteim shiri bakas v'sheyulacha. So we'll say, let me just point out what Tanakh Beishal is dashing over here. The pasuk itself says, Rak kadoshecha asher yihiyu lecha. So we'll say, the pasuk says, the kachim that you will have. What's the case of kachim that you will have in the future? What's that case? So Rashi says, Havi Omer Vlade kachim utmurasan. So I will say, the pasuk is talking about what's the kachim you will have. So it's the offspring of kachim, right? In other words, your current sacrificial animal gives birth, or ultimately again tumura, the exchanges. So we'll say, so ultimately, what's the halacha? What's the halacha by Vlade kachim and tumura? They're consecrated, and therefore they have to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash as well. So ma takana son. I will say, what's the takana for Vlade kachim and for tumura? Ma takana son. Tisa uvasa alamakom shayiv charashem. Ultimately, you have to bring. In other words, so what does it mean you have to bring them to the Beis Hamikdash? What does that mean? They're kabanos. They're kabanos. So Tanakh Beishal is saying the pasuk over here is teaching me lechol. Sorry, rak kadoshecha sheyulacha. Ultimately, the kachim that you will have. What are the kachim that you will have? Future tense. That refers ultimately to the offspring of sacrificial animals and to the tamura, to the forbidden exchanges of sacrificial animals. They become consecrated themselves, and therefore they must be brought up to the Beis Hamikdash. Matak anasan tisa uvasa alamakom asher yivchar Hashem. Yachol. Here we go. Yachol yalim lebeis habechira v'imanim emayim umazon b'shel shiamusu. You might have thought about say it's true. You have to bring them up to the Beis Hamikdash. But what do you do with them once you bring them up to the Beis Hamikdash? Maybe what? Maybe you deprive them of food and drink and just let them die. Just let them die. In other words, I'm not going to offer them up because they're not real karbanos. But I'll bring them up to the Beis Hamikdash and essentially just let them wither away there in the Beis Hamikdash. Talmud lomar vasisa olosecha. Excuse me. Vasisa olosecha habasra v'hadam. Pasuk says you'll go ahead and perform your olah. I both say this is the next pasuk. You will go ahead and perform your olos habasar v'adam, both the offering of the flesh and of the blood. Lomar lecha, we'll say to teach you what? Kedera sha'ata noig ba'ola noog b'tmurasa. The same way you conduct yourself with the olah, conduct yourself with what? The temura of the olah. Kederach sha'ata noig b'shlamim. The same way you conduct yourself with your shlamim, nohog bivladehem. Conduct yourself with the offspring of the shlamim. So we'll say, so just understand what's happening over here. Something really dramatic. So Tanakh Beishal is making this drasha. The drasha, Rak kadoshecha sheyulacha, tells us that if you have a karban, I will say, and then again that karban gives birth, or you have a karban and you exchange that karban for another animal, the vlad, the offspring, the tmura, have the same complete sacrificial sanctity as the source animal itself, either the mother or the original karban animal, right? And I will say, but you might have thought, fine, you have to bring them up to the Beis Hamikdash. But once you get to the Beis Hamikdash, you don't offer them up. You just deprive them of food and water, let them die. No, kamashla, no. You offer these animals up, and you offer these animals up as regular karbanos. They are bona fide karbanos. Bona fide karbanos. Shabbos says, therefore, again, like the Gemara says, the Tamura of an Ola, or I should say, right, the Tamura of an Ola is treated just like the Ola. The offspring of a Shlamim is treated just like Shlamim. It's vice versa as well. In other words, it's not just Dafka, Tamura, Ola, and Vlad of a Shlamim, it's all the same. So we'll say, now watch this. Here we go. Here's where it gets interesting. Yochel af Vlad Chatas Utmuras Asham. So we'll say, you might have thought the same halacha would apply to the offspring of a Chatas or the Tamura of an Asham. Now we'll say, Chatas and Asham are lumped together because they are both sin offerings. So you might have thought that the same halacha, so says, what have we established? That when it comes to an Ola and the Shlamim, the Tamura exchange or Vlad or offspring of these Karbanos is afforded the same status as the source animal itself. You might have thought that the same halacha applies to a Chatas and an Asham, the offspring of a Chatas and an Asham, or the Tamura of an Chatas and an Asham have the same status as the source animal. You might have thought that. Talmud Lomar, Rak. Incredible. Therefore the pasuk says, Rak. I will say, what is Rak? Rak is a miyut. Rak is an exclusionary word to teach you, no. This din, that the Tamura and the Vlad of a sacrificial animal has the same status as the source animal, this is dafka din by what? By Ola and Shlamim, not a din by Chatas and Asham. Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, Ino tzarech. Rabbi Akiva says the truth is, Rabbi say once again, Rabbi Akiva is not disagreeing with the halacha. What he's disagreeing with is the derivation. Rabbi Akiva says, you don't need this whole drasha. I'll tell you, it's very simple. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ino tzarech, Harihu Omer, Asham hu, Bahavyaso Yehei. So we'll say the pasuk, the Torah speaking about Asham, ultimately says, Asham hu. Rabbi will say, what does Asham hu mean? According to Rabbi Akiva, an Asham retains its core identity, but only the original Asham which has its core identity. The offspring of an Asham does not have Asham identity. The Tamura of an Asham does not have Asham identity. I will say, by the way, I just want to point out, whatever is going to apply to the Asham is going to apply for what? For what? For the Chatas. For the Chatas. So I will say, it's Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva is agreeing. So I will say, let's kind of analyze what we have over here. Here's what we're being introduced to. Is that there's a concept that halacha l'maisa, the Tamura, exchange, Vlad, offspring of a sacrificial animal has the same status as the source animal. But the Gemara's darshaning over here is Rabbi Shmuel says that halacha l'maisa, this halacha only applies to Ola and Shlamim, does not apply to Chatas and Asham. Why not? Because in the pasuk that teaches me that the Vlad and the Tamura have the same status as the original animal, Torah uses the word Rak. And Rak is a miyut. So to tell you that it only applies to Ola and Shlamim doesn't apply to Chatas and Asham. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Shmuel, I agree with you on the bottom line, that ultimately it's only the Tamura and the Vlad of an Ola and an Asham that has the same identity as the source animal. Not by Chatas and Asham, but I disagree with you about the source. Rabbi Akiva says the source is Asham hu. We'll say, what does Asham hu teach me? Bav Yasayehu. That an Asham is an Asham, and that Asham status is not passed down to its offspring or to its Tamura. That's it. So we'll say, why is it important for us? Katoni, we'll say, but what do you see from here? Katoni, Yochel Yalim Beis Abechira V'Yimane Mayim Mehen Umazu Shimusu. Now we'll say, here's what's interesting. In the Bracha that we saw, what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said, I would have thought that when you have the Tamura, or when you have the Vlad of the Omer Shlamim, while it's true that you have to bring it up to the Beis HaMikdash, I would have thought, what do you do with it in the Beis HaMikdash? What do you do with it? You starve it. Just let it die. In other words, I'll bring it up to the Beis HaMikdash, but I'm not going to give it food and water. I'm just going to deprive it. I would have thought maybe that's what you should do. Ultimately, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says you shall bring your ola. But one second, the Gemara says va'amai ha vlad chatasu tigaminon ba misa. But one second, I will say included in this, you have the vlad chatas, the offspring of the chatas, and we established already again that Allah Chalamaisa that is left to die. Ilav kra hava amina. Vlad chatas b'chama. So I'll say, first of all, before you turn the page, look at Rashi. Ilav kra vasisa alosecha hava amina vlade chatas meisim b'chamakom shein. I will say, we're not for the pasuk. I would have thought that the offspring of a chatas is left to die wherever. wherever. So the Gemara says, Ilav kra hava mina vlad chatas b'chol makom. I would have thought that a vlad chatas is just left to die, but left to die anywhere. Amud Bezer will say, Vlade kachim bebeis hamechira. The offspring of kachim perhaps are dafka brought to die in the Beis Hamikdash. Kamash malon delo. Kamash will say that the offspring of an ola and an asham are not only not left to die, but what? Actually brought up and offered up on the Mizbeach. So Katani, Yochel af Vlad Chatas Utmuras Asham Kain. So the Gemara says, according to the Gemara before, I would have thought that what? That even the offspring of a Chatas and the Temura of an Asham should enjoy the same treatment, namely, maybe what Rabbi was saying, that the same way that the Temura, ultimately again, or the Vlad of an Ola and Shlamim are brought as a carbon, I would have thought that perhaps the offspring of a Chatas and a Temura, the offspring of a Chatas or the Temura of an Asham should be brought up and offered up in the Beis Hamikdash as well. Talmud Lomar, Rak. Therefore, I will say the pasuk says Rak. This is Rabbi Shmuel. Pasuk says Rak, and Rak tells you that no. The din that the Vlad and the Temura have the same status as the source animal. This is dafka where only by Ol and Shlamim, not by Chatas and Asham. But ask the Gemara, I understand Lama Likra Hilchas Sagimirila Vlad Chatas Lemisa Azon. So we'll say the Gemara says, why do you need a pasuk? Right? So we'll say, why do you even need a pasuk at all? We'll say, we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And what's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai? We'll say that the offspring of a chatas is left to die. So we'll see here what's happening over here. Rabbi Shmuel is going ahead and espousing an entire drasha, a fascinating drasha. What's his drasha? We'll say first part of the drasha is that Vlad of a carbon and Temura of a carbon have the same status. We'll say, what does it mean have the same status? Not only that they're endowed with sacrificial sanctity, but what? They're actually offered up in the Beis HaMikdash. But yet Rabbi Shmuel says, but Rak, a miot, says that only applies to all Shlamim, doesn't apply to Chatas and Hashem. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. Why do you need a pasuk to teach you that the offspring of a Chatas is not offered up? That's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We already know that. The offspring of a Chatas ultimately again is left to die. To which the Gemara says, Hachenami ukra hula asham da'asa. No, you're right. Rak doesn't come to teach me about Chatas, because then I have halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What does Rak come to teach me? I will say, what does Rak come to teach me? Asham. The Gemara says, Asham nami helchasa gemirila. I'll say Asham is also part of the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. After all, because we know, kol she'ilu b'chatas nesa, b'asham roa. I will say there's a general principle that in any case where a chatas animal is left to die, an asham animal is what? Put out to pasture. Then I will say, for our purposes, that's the same thing. Because what does it tell you? It's not offered up on the Mizbeach. So why would I need another drasha of Rak to exclude asham, where if by definition chatas is excluded, by dint of the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, by definition asham is excluded as well. Ella, we'll see, here we go. Ella, ime hilchasa, hava amina hilchasa. So let's listen to this. Because if this was just base, we'll say, here's what we have. Let's pause here. It's really actually quite riveting. So we'll say, if we pause here and analyze what we have for just a moment. Here's what I have, right? I have Rabbi Shmuel, right? What does Rabbi Shmuel teach me? So without going through the psukim themselves, but just halacha. Rabbi Shmuel says, what am I learning? An interesting halacha. That the Vlad, the offspring of a carbon, and the Temura of a carbon have what? Sacrificial sanctity. Rabbi will say, not just any sacrificial sanctity, but what kind of sacrificial sanctity? Complete sacrificial sanctity. To the point that the Torah tells me, you offer up as a carbon, the offspring of a carbon. You offer up as a carbon, the Temura, the exchange of a carbon. Now I will say, where is this halacha illustrated? It's illustrated in the context of an Ola and Shlamim. You might have thought this applies to all karbanos. What does Rabbi Shmuel say? Rak. There's a word. The word rak is in the pasuk, and rak says no. Rak is an exclusionary phrase. Only what? Only shlamim. Only all of this applies to. What doesn't it apply to? Chatas. That if you have the offspring of a chatas, or in exchange for a chatas, we'll say, what's the halacha? That animal, while it has sanctity, is not offered up on the Mizbeach. Instead, what happens? It's left to die. By chatas and an asham, or chashav put out the pasture. Shabbosai, the Gemara's question now is, I don't understand. Why do I need a pasuk to learn out that halacha? That is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai, a Sinaitic law. And what is the nature of Sinaitic law? What does Sinaitic law say? That halacha l'maisa vlad chatas l'misa. The offspring of a chatas is left to die. And I will say, that would also include the timura of a chatas. So why do I need a pasuk to teach me if I already have halacha l'Moshe Misinai? Here it is. I will say. Here we go. The Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Because if you would have just said the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, hava amina hilchasa, I would have thought, look, it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. That's what? It's halacha l'Moshe Misinai that the offspring of a chatas is not offered up, is left to die. V'i akrive lo lechayiv alei v'lo klum. But I will say, what happens if he did offer it up? Right? So I will say, here's the case. I have a chatas, I separate the chatas, I am definitely going to have to bring a chatas when Mashiach comes. No shayla, I'll be bringing a herd. Right? So I will say, so now what happens? I have my chatas, Baruch Hashem, you know what happens? You take your eyes off those chatas animals for just a moment, and who knows what happens, right? Then what happens? Chatas gives birth. So I will say, so now what happens? I have a vlad chatas. I will say, what do I do with my vlad chatas? What do I do with it? What do I do with it? Nothing. You let it die. Right? To bring up to the Beis it's left to die. So I will say, let's say I did offer it up. Right? Let's say I did offer it up. Right? I took it to the Beis Hamikdash, I offered it up as a carbon. So, from the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, I would have thought, listen, I offered it up. It's not ideal, but there's no liability for it. Lo l'chayiv alev, lo klum. Kamash malan kra, what does the pasuk come to add? Di'imak rivlei kaim alei ba'asei. So the pasuk comes to teach me that no. If you offer up vlad chatas or temuras chatas, you're over an asay. A positive command. Again, not a prohibition, but you are in violation of an asay. I will say, which asay? I'm in violation of an asay. If we kind of bring this together, what really emerges is something quite amazing. We just learned a major piece of Hilchos Karbanos, which is what? That number one halacha l'maisa. If you have an Ola and a Shlamim, and those Karbanos either are exchanged for other Karbanos, Aser, that's called Tamura, or birth other animals, those animals, the Tamura or the Vlad, have sacrificial sanctity. To the point that what? They are mamish offered up on the Mizbeach. But yet this halacha only applies to Ola and Shlamim, does not apply to Chatas and Asham. What's the status ultimately again of the Vlad or the Tamura, the Chatas and an Asham? Not eligible for sacrifice. Right? What you do with it? Left to die, left to pasture, fine. But not eligible for sacrifice. So I will say, so now what's interesting is, it seems to be that I have two sources for this halacha. One is rak, a pasuk. The other is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Why do I need both? So halacha l'maisa, the Gemara explains why. Because at the end of the day, if it was just on the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, you might have thought that although you're not permitted to offer up the offspring of a chatas, if you did it, fine, it's a karban. Kamash on the pasuk says no, it's aser. And if you do so, you are actually in violation of an asay. Incredible. Shabbos say so. I'll just point out, just kind of looping back. We're also left off over here where it doesn't matter halacha l'maisa, but it's just interesting with the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, namely about Shabbos say what happened. Right, we had the case of where Reuben the Nazir dies. He leaves behind an unspecified pile of money that was set aside for his kabbalos. Rabbi say, what do you do with that pile? What do you do with it? Nidava. Rabbi say, I just want to point out, everyone is in agreement with that, right? That's not a contested halacha. But where is the machlokes? What the source of this is. We're left over with Rabbi Yochanan saying it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai, and Rish Lakish ultimately saying that it's a pasuk in the Torah. Good, just interesting. We'll say good. Let's go a little bit later. So the Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Akiva Omer Einu Tzarich, Haru Omer Asham Hu Bav Yasuyeh. Actually, no, both say, you know what we're going to do? It's a little bit different. We're going to stop over here for today. I'm going to share with you a quick vart on the parsha. Takes us back to our, if you remember again, on our original days. I'm leaving. Rabbi Richter is giving shir tomorrow. I'm leaving a little work. All right? I'll say so. So this takes us back to our old days a little bit, where we used a little vart on the parsha, and then start Shachar Slate. So again, Chadesh Shavenu Kikadem. Well, so listen to this. So the pasuk says this is in. Actually, let me just. Right, the pasuk says this is in Parak Chav Beis, So halacha, pasuk aleph. Pasuk says, Im machteres, yimatzeh haganov, v'huga, v'ameis ein lo damim. Shabbos say, an interesting halacha. Talking about the idea, machteres yimatzeh haganov. So what does this mean? If a thief comes in secret to your house to steal, right? Rashi HaKadosh points out over here, machteres kishahaya choter es habayis. Shabbos say, so what happens? Someone breaks into my house and is trying to steal my stuff. I find such a person doing this. Ein lo damim. So v'huka v'ameis, I kill the guy, right? We have this also, right? Castle doctrine. Right? Castle doctrine, right? That you're allowed to go ahead and defend your home. Someone comes to your home, someone breaks into your home, you're allowed to go ahead and defend your home. And if you do, there's no legal liability. That's the pasuk saying, Machteres yimatzeh haganov. So again, someone comes into your house the middle of the night to try to steal your stuff, v'huka, and you kill him, and he dies, ein lo damim, there is no liability. So we'll say there is an incredible piece by the Kotzker. The Kotzker, Bracha, says something that I just want to quote to you. He says, what does it mean? In b'machteres yimatzeh haganov. So we'll say the literal translation is, if in secret, machteres, Rashi says, machteres means choter, literally tunneling. If a person comes into your house again in secrecy, so the Kotzker says, kilomar, there's an incredible Musar Haskel on this. Im choter adam b'pnimiuso, uma'amik lachtor b'nivchi nafsho hachavuyim. So Rabbi say, listen to this. Im b'machteres. Machteres is a mandate. Machteres is, I need to really go deep inside of myself. I need to really tunnel inwards. You know, I will say, so often in life, we don't really know who we are. So often in life, we even only know ourselves superficially. I know myself like on the chitzonius level. But what's the mandate in life? Machteres. I have to tunnel inward. I have to discover the real me. I have to figure out ultimately again, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, what are the positives, what are the minuses. I have to tunnel inward. The Kotzker says, if you find the courage to go b'machteres, to literally tunnel into yourself, you'll find something. Listen to this. Chazaka alav, get ready. Sheyimatzeh es haganov shebo. I will say, if you tunnel inward, right? B'machteres, what will you find? Yimatzeh haganov. You'll find your inner ganov. Rabbi say, what's your inner ganov? We all have an inner ganov. Right? The inner ganov, Rabbi say, are those things. It's the qualities, it's the traits, it's the behaviors, it's the actions which derail me from accomplishing great things in life. See, Rabbi say, often when we don't accomplish what we want to accomplish, the reflexive reaction is to blame it on someone or something external. I would be great if I didn't have to drive carpool, which actually is a true statement. That's actually a true statement, right? That actually is objectively true, right? I would be great if I didn't have to do this. Or I would be great if my wife would be like this, if my parents would have given me like this, if my boss would only recognize this. And by the way, they may all be true statements, but at the end of the day, the buck of your life stops with you. At the end of the day, my responsibility for self-actualization rests with me. And when I'm honest with myself, if I'm willing to go b'machteres, if I'm willing to tunnel inwards, Rabbi was saying, I'm going to find my ganav. I'm going to find the things that are stealing from my dynamic life accomplishment. I'm going to find the things that are preventing me from really becoming the best version of me. I'm going to find the things that are really holding me back. And I'm going to discover it's no one else. It's no one else. It's me. It's me. I'm going to find the behaviors that are stunting my growth. I'm going to find the habits that are holding me back. I'm going to find all different things inside of me if I'm willing to tunnel inside of myself. In the machteres, let's say if you're willing to really be alone with yourself, really willing to tunnel inward, really willing to take a hard look inside, yimatzeh haganov. Ultimately, again, I will find the things that are holding me back. And of course, the Kotzker doesn't say it, but it's understood. And if you're able to find the things that are holding you back, then ultimately what? You're also able to chase the ganov out. Because we'll say, when does the ganov remain inside the personalistic house? Only when the owner is not looking. But once the owner comes, what does the ganov do? He jumps out the first available window. If I have the courage to go Liba machteres, to tunnel inward and take a real look at myself, I'll find the ganov. And when I find the ganov, I'll be able to finally deal with him, chase him away from my sacred personalistic home, and accomplish great things. Chevra, Shabbos. All right, Jabosai Chevra on Zoom. A good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.